Keep moving. The sickness spreads quickly. Do not stop for anyone.
In the year 1347, in a small village in southern England, a 19-year-old young man woke up before dawn on the dirt floor of the single room he shared with his entire family. There were no beds, there were no mattresses, there was straw spread over compacted earth, and on top of that straw, he and his parents and his siblings slept together like animals, wrapped in the only clothing they owned, because in the 14th century, clothing and bedding were the same thing. The room had no glass windows. It had a hole in the wall covered with an oiled rag that let in the light and also the cold. The smoke from the central fire filled the upper half of the room with no chimney and escaped slowly through the gaps in the thatched roof, and the soot of decades covered every wall and every beam until they turned black. That was what his home smelled like. That was what he smelled like. That was what everyone smelled like. What he was going to eat that morning was the same thing he had eaten every morning of his life. Black, dense bread made from unbolted rye and barley, with so much bran and so much unprocessed grain that chewing it crunched with fragments of millstone. Archaeologists who have studied the skeletons of medieval English peasants find a specific mark on their teeth. The surfaces are worn down to the pulp from decades of chewing that bread full of stone particles. Their teeth recorded their diet with more precision than any historical document. He was 19 years old and had already buried 2 siblings. Infant mortality in 14th century England hovered around 35% before the age of 5. If you survived childhood, your life expectancy reached approximately 45 years, but that number hides the reality. Many died at 20, many at 30, and those who reached 60 were considered extraordinary elders. The body of a 40-year-old peasant in 1347 was functionally equivalent to a 70-year-old in the modern world. Severe arthritis, tooth loss, curvature of the spine from decades of agricultural labor with primitive tools, loss of vision from specific nutrient deficiencies, all of that at 40. On that day in 1347, a royal recruiter arrived at his village with a proclamation from King Edward III. England was at war with France. It needed archers. English law had spent decades requiring all young men to practice archery every Sunday after Mass. It was not optional. Not practicing was a fine. The result of that law was that England had the most lethal reserve of archers in Europe, men whose bodies had been literally deformed by years of drawing war bows with 70 to 150 pounds of draw weight. The skeletons of medieval English archers are recognizable at a glance. The bone of the left arm is noticeably thicker than the right. The spine shows a characteristic asymmetric curve. The bones of the left shoulder show lesions from chronic overuse. Drawing an English warbow was but a sport. It was a professional deformation that began in childhood. They told him the campaign would last a few months. They told him he would receive pay. They did not tell him how much would die on the road before he saw a single Frenchman. Crossing the English Channel took between 6 and 12 hours depending on the wind. He did it on a wooden transport vessel with no closed deck, pressed against 200 other men in a space designed for cargo. Motion sickness affected most English peasants who had never seen the sea, and there was nowhere to escape from it or from its physical consequences. The water in the hold smelled of tar and urine and bile. He arrived in France completely soaked, having not slept, having vomited everything in his stomach, with his feet already beginning to soften inside the leather shoes that would be the only ones he would have for the entire campaign. The march from the French coast to the campaign objective covered hundreds of kilometers. Infantry soldiers marched on foot. A man carrying basic equipment could cover between 25 and 40 kilometers a day in good conditions. The conditions were never good. The French autumn of 1347 was extraordinarily rainy. Medieval roads were not roads in any modern sense. They were traces in the earth that centuries of traffic had sunk until they became mud channels that could reach the knee. Marching through them for weeks destroyed footwear. And when the footwear was destroyed, what remained was cloth wrapped around the feet. And when the cloth became saturated with mud and water, what remained was skin directly exposed to mud and water. And that had a name: trench foot. The infection began between the toes, where the skin remained wet for days at a time, and spread to the instep. And in severe cases, gangrene followed the infection, and gangrene meant amputation if there was someone to perform it, or death if there was not. He slept on the ground. There were no tents for common infantry soldiers during the marches. You slept wrapped in your own clothing in whatever field you stopped in, regardless of the weather. Temperatures in northern France in October and November of 1347 were 1 to 6 degrees Celsius at night. Wet, with wet clothing, no insulation, on wet earth. Mild hypothermia was the normal condition. Severe hypothermia regularly killed men who simply did not wake up in the morning, and their companions found them stiff and left them by the side of the road because there was no time and no energy for more. Nutrition during the marches consisted of what could be carried and what could be taken. What could be carried was campaign biscuit, bread baked twice until completely dry, hard as wood, which lasted weeks without rotting, but which required soaking in water before it could be chewed without breaking a tooth. A standard daily ration for an English soldier of the 14th century on campaign was approximately 2,000 calories on the best days. The caloric expenditure of marching between 25 and 40 kilometers with equipment, in cold, under constant physical stress, exceeded 4,000 calories. The cumulative caloric deficit after weeks of campaigning was visible in the bodies, the cheekbones that became more pronounced, the eye sockets that sunk, the clothing that began to hang where muscle and fat used to be. It was not dramatic starvation. It was the slow and constant emptying of a body that consumes more than it receives, week after week, until what is left is unrecognizable as the same man who departed. What could be taken was whatever remained on the French farms the army passed through. Medieval chronicles document with remarkable detail the provisioning system of English armies in France, which depended massively on organized plunder. A unit of men arrived at a farm, emptied the cellar of roots and dried grains, killed the animals it found, and continued. The family that had spent the summer cultivating and preserving those provisions to survive the winter was left with nothing. French sources from the period describe villages where people began eating ground tree bark mixed with whatever little remained to make a kind of bread, and where children died of hunger in the spring following the passage of the English army. The young English soldier ate that family's provisions without knowing their names, because otherwise he did not eat. The siege camp where he finally arrived was not a camp in any sense that suggests structure or comfort. It was a mud field surrounded by its own waste. The latrines were trenches dug at the perimeter, and after weeks of use by thousands of men, those trenches overflowed into the general camp mud with the rains, and the camp mud and the contents of the latrines became the same grayish infected substance that covered everything and everyone. Dysentery was endemic in all medieval camps. It was not a possibility, it was a certainty. The body of a man who drinks water contaminated with his own fecal waste for weeks suffers a loss of fluids and electrolytes that in moderate cases produces severe weakness, and in serious cases produces death by dehydration in 2 or 3 days. Historical sources from the period estimate that in many medieval campaigns, dysentery and camp diseases killed more men than direct combat.
Get off me! I can't breathe! Stay down, you dog! Hurry up, soldier. 1 biscuit, salted meat and peas.
It's barely enough, Master.
Move along now. Biscuit, peas and meat. Move along now. That's your ration. Hardtack, peas and salted meat. Now move on.
Five groats and a penny.
That cloak will keep the chill out. Right, bury him deep. We can use this cloak. Nothing wasted.
Help me with these boots, then.
Get the wax deep in the fibres. Damp string won't fly true.
Rub it hard, lad. A wet string is useless weight. This wax keeps the damp out.
Aye, Master.
I don't know if I can keep doing this, Father. The killing. The Lord is your strength. Receive his mercy.
them then, let's see.
A pox on it, you lose. To the palisades! Quickly, move! Get your armor on! Archers, man the left flank! Hurry! To your posts! Quickly! Archers, to the palisade! Sound the horn again! To the palisade, quickly! Get your gear on! Archers, to the wall! They're attacking! Get to the palisade! Move, archers, move! This way! There's no stopping it. Just try to ease his pain. Keep clear, man. Aye, the sickness spreads.
Inside those walls are people who are hungry and waiting. Outside is him, also hungry and waiting.
moving. The sickness spreads quickly. Do not stop for anyone.
Dépêchez-vous, ils arrivent!
Par ici, plus vite. S'il vous plaît, aidez-moi.